Okay, great. It's great to be here today at Casual Connect. Today I'm going to talk about maximizing across the game developer's life cycle. So I'm going to talk about all the different steps a game developer needs to think about, everything from promotion, scaling, down to monetization and engaging the users. So I'm from InMobi. For those of you who are not familiar with InMobi, we're the world's largest independent mobile advertising network. So just to give you guys some statistics, our reach globally is about 40% of all global mobile internet users. We were recently named by MIT Tech Review as one of the 50 most disruptive companies globally, alongside the likes of Apple and Google. To give you guys some idea of the scale, so our current user reach globally is about 691 million users. So for our game developers, what we offer is massive global reach. We also have some very interesting technologies around rich media. So I think the previous speaker talked about HTML5 in the context of apps. What we create beyond standard banners is also HTML5 rich media mobile ads. And we do that using our in-house InMobi studio technologies. And I'll share some examples of it, but we do that all in-house and we usually do it for free. And then broadly speaking, beyond being a mobile ad network, InMobi is playing as a technology player in the mobile ecosystem. So we're constantly coming out with new technologies, particularly on the side of helping developers. So I'm going to talk about some technologies like InMobi Ad Tracker that helps on conversion tracking to your CPI, CPD goals, as well as the InMobi Lifetime Value Platform. So as I mentioned, our reach globally is about 691 million users, and you can see the spread. So whether you're a developer in Asia trying to go west, or you're a developer in the US trying to go east, there's obviously huge scale you can gain through advertising. So fundamentally as an ad network, what we do is we connect advertisers, that could be brands or developers, with publishers. So publishers will be either mobile apps or mobile sites, and the advertisers can be either brands or they could be developers themselves. So on the game side, we pretty much work with all the top gaming companies. So everyone from King.com, Supercell, from big to small, we work with them all in order to get them to a certain scale objectives that they have. So let me first start with what is the major challenge facing developers today, right? And I think most of you are probably familiar with this, which is today on the iOS, Android store, there's about 800,000 apps each. And within that, we know some sobering statistics, such as 60% of app developers don't make a profit. And then the other interesting statistic is only 30% of users, once they download the app, only use it once. So this kind of lays bare a huge problem that's happening in the ecosystem from a developer perspective. So how do you address this? So the key way to address this challenge is to really, as I mentioned earlier, think through the developer lifecycle. So the three key things you have to keep in mind is, number one, how do you acquire users? And how do you acquire users throughout the stages of your game or your app? Secondly, you need to think about, okay, once you acquire the users, how do you engage them and how do you retain them? And then the third piece is making money. So there's obviously multiple routes to making money off of your game. I'm going to focus more on the advertising piece of it and how can you think about monetization. So let's talk about the life cycle. So typically when you have an app, the way you want to think about the life cycle for a mobile game is you want to build awareness, you then want to achieve scale, you want to really think about performance, and then you want to finally drive and constantly optimize against user quality. So then you're ensuring you're not paying for low quality users. So let me first talk about awareness. The idea for this is when you first come out with an app, typically it's new, you want to get the word out, beyond your friends or your company. You want to better understand, and this is kind of the test phase, who is using your app, how are they using it, and what are they using it for? And that was something that you're constantly optimizing against. And you also want to understand who's willing to pay for it and in what mechanism. So this is usually that awareness phase where you really need to experiment and think that through. So what do we recommend? So in this stage, we recommend that, and this is what a lot of the big game developers do, is that they build or rebuild really cool ads for them that really build that awareness about the actual game. The other key element is targeting. So within advertising, of course, the name of the game is targeting. So if you want to reach a certain segment of users, depending on your game, whether it's targeted to, say, females versus males versus youth, or whatever is the right segment, in order to get that quality of users, it's important to think about how you're going to target it. Targeting can also include geographies. So let's say you're a Taiwan game developer and you're trying to spread out into Southeast Asia or Asia or the West, then you can target country by country as well. The other recommendation we have is experimentation. When you come out with an ad unit, it's important, especially if it's the first time for your game, to really experiment with different creatives and different formats to figure out what is the one that's working best and what are people engaging on. So rich media ad units compared to standard banner ad units are full screen ads. So basically it starts off as a standard banner, you click, it goes full screen. You can always close the ad and you're back to whatever content you were surfing. What's interesting about rich media is it's highly engaging ad unit. So it yields much higher eCPMs as well, which I'll talk about later. But from a developer perspective, you're trying to build awareness. It's a great way to have users actually experience your game before they actually download it. So I'll give some examples. This is a more basic example. So what we have is a technology called InMobi console, where literally in 1 minute you can create this ad unit for your game. So if you're already on the Google Play or iPhone App Store, you basically you go in and you click, and it basically creates and recreates this this kind of ad unit, which gives all the key information for the user. So it starts off as that standard banner. You click, it goes full screen. It gives a summary of what are the reviews for the app and the key details of the app, etc. And then it drives people to the purchase or to the download if it's free. This is an example of rich media. So this is an ad unit. It actually won some awards as well that we did for Sega. What was interesting is what we literally did was skin the entire first level of this game. So this is for Sega Samurai Blood Show. So we skinned the game level, and so people could actually play it within the ad unit itself. And once they got engaged on it, it effectively prompted to say, want to play more? Download now. So it's a great way to really draw the user in and also ensure you're getting high quality users that are really going to be interested in coming back more and more to the game. Some other examples of very high impact ads you can do is things like static interstitials. So these are examples we did with Kakao Talk and a couple of others, where again it's full screen and it's up to the publisher as to when it serves. It could be when an app is first opened or closed or in between, but given the screen space and it's forced out, it tends to have much higher CTRs. This is a very interesting new format we're doing, which is around video stitials. So if you look at the one in the center, this is with Supercell, with Clash of Titans, where you can, basically if you have a trailer for your game, you can play the trailer within the ad unit. So you click, it plays, and then it has some information, and then you can download it. So these are all just to give you guys examples of how this would work. Another interesting ad unit that we've recently launched is timerstitials. So the idea is it's an interstitial, but it'll go away within a certain number of seconds. So it's an example on the left-hand side with King.com with Candy Crush, similar with WeChat. So, some interesting data. There's a question and survey put out of what are the factors that influence the app download decision making. And they actually compared it of US smartphone users versus China smartphone users. And what's interesting is, when you look at what are the drivers here, you see with Chinese smartphone users, whether the app is actually featured in the App Store of some sort is very important. For US smartphone users, price is very important, but you can also see there's some key data that is important to put in any kind of ads you do to build awareness that's important, such as the description, the App Store reviews, some sort of recommendation feature or link. This is a case study we did with Sonic where, in this case, basically we got them to the #1 spot on the iTunes store when this launched. This is for the 10-year anniversary of Sonic. So it had about a 0.7 CTR, and you can see the other stats where about 42% after seeing the trailer proceeded to actually download the app. This is what I was mentioning earlier, that you really want to try different formats. So you want to constantly rotate. You want to have clear calls to actions. Typically, having a tap-to-play video is very effective because then people can experience and see the game. You want to make sure that the language and the creative is very simple and concise to really draw the user in. Another big recommendation, especially when talking about mobile, is it's important to keep your game app under 50 megabytes. And this is particularly important when you start thinking about going outside of, say, developed markets into more emerging markets. So typically, this is our recommendation to keep it at this side to maximize your installs. So a very important thing in order to reach certain CPI or CPD goals that you may have, which is cost per install or cost per download, for advertising, is you need to be able to constantly optimize and ensure that you're tracking towards that goal. So this is a technology we came out with called InMobi Ad Tracker. It's free. It's basically a bit of technology you put into the app where basically we can track to conversion goals. So we can tell you how many people not only installed the app but opened it up and whatever end conversion goal you want to track towards. So now, how do you get to the quality users? So let me talk about targeting. So as I mentioned, there's a huge range of targeting you can do in mobile. So at the most basic level, you can do OS, device level targeting, carrier level targeting. So that's very powerful and unique on mobile. But on top of that, you can do things like geo targeting, so things like country, city. Typically for game developers, they're usually at the country level that they target. And then again, there's a range of things around demographics, content, et cetera, that you can do. So here's an example. So if you're trying to target, say, women, men, or teen, this is kind of a breakdown of gaming, non-gaming applications of how you would think about that, right? So something that's more, say, Angry Birds might be teen. Something that's, like draw something or would be perhaps more women. So you'd really think about, for your particular game, what is your target segment that you're trying to go after. And what we also recommend to build awareness is really experiment with your budgets. So we typically recommend about 5 days if you've never done it before and you don't know how it's going to work, to really figure out what's your ideal spend, and you can constantly see how it's being optimized. This is just a point to remember for game developers that are looking to go global or to expand beyond whatever country you're in, that English isn't just the US, UK, and Canada. I mean, it sounds obvious, Australia, New Zealand. There's actually a lot of other countries that you can tap into that are big populations, including India, etc., that is important to think about. So as I mentioned with this conversion tracker, what it's important is that you can really optimize to the CPI goal. So here's a case study we did for a social game from Japan where they had a CPI goal of $8 in this case. I think it was some sort of MMORG. And what we delivered was something less than that, so 9% lower. So it gives you a sense of, having that kind of conversion tracking is very important, and also having that detailed targeting. Similar example with mobile payments. So I think there's some mobile payment folks in the room as well. And they're typically trying to drive to similar kind of conversion. So this is another example of that. So let me move on to scale. So let's say you've built awareness, people are coming into your app, you've kind of figured it out, you understand how they're paying, you understand how their usage patterns, so now you want to go big. So how do you do that? So your scale objective is you have a good idea of who your target is, and now you want huge numbers, and you want to be maybe top of the charts in your different countries. So how do you think about it? The key recommendation is, well, again, depending on the scope, you want to get to global campaigns. You want to do burst campaigns. I'll talk about that in a second, what that means. And there's even options of doing things like network takeovers. These are all tactical techniques that a lot of the game developers use. And then there's also the distribution piece on inventory. So let me talk about burst and buyout. Sorry, some of the formatting's messing up. It's from Mac to PC. So one thing to think about on burst is you really want to drive install velocity. Install velocity is one of the variables that gets you higher up on the App Store. So when you do a burst, what it means is you're driving a high number of installs within a very short period of time. So usually you pick a couple of days, and it has a very high influence on your rank. The other piece is around buyouts. So this is where you basically can attempt to block competition. This does happen quite a bit when you're talking about the bigger game developers, where if you want to drive certain installs for a communication app, then you can block out competition by doing some sort of network buys. So what does it mean to do a burst? This is just an example of how it would be. So typically, if you just do a regular marketing campaign and it's kind of at a sustenance mode, that's kind of what you see in the lower part of the graph. If you do a burst, clearly you'll see the spike over the few days that you do it in terms of installs, and then it will drop post the burst, but typically drops to a higher new normal. right? So that's the real advantage of doing these kind of things, because you really, really get out there the awareness in a very short period of time, and you have a much higher base to work off of. Here's an example with a leading European game advertiser that did a burst. So you can see kind of how they targeted it. So in this case, it was a burst, but it was a large burst over a period of time. In this case, it was for 1 month. What they did is a mix of different banners. So they did regular banners, they did high density banners, which is much higher resolution banners, which again attracts users more into the ad, and interstitials. So they did a combination of things, and they were constantly rotating the creative. So when you get sophisticated enough on it, there's actually a lot of management you can do that will really, really optimize things to the next level. So in this case, they had a target CPI of $2.4, and the average CTR on this campaign yielded about 1.68%, which is very good. For those of you who are also looking at games in Facebook, for example, you can similarly drive traffic that way, right? So you have a banner that'll click and go directly into the Facebook page, or drive to install. In this case, also similarly within the ad unit, you can skin the experience within the ad to draw the user into it. Some interesting statistics. I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is from Distimo, but what does it take to get to the top 25? And this is specifically around games. So they said, within in this case the Apple App Store, how many daily downloads are required. So if you look across all game categories within the App Store, and this is for the U.S. in this particular data, it was around 25,000 downloads a day across all the game categories to top it. But then when you actually break it down by the specific subcategories, so arcade versus puzzle games versus simulation, it's a much more manageable number to think about to getting to the tops of those subcategories. So this is some data that we actually put together. We did an analysis of over 500 apps, including games, to get a sense of what is the index of the number of downloads required across each of the different markets. So if you look at US being 1, in the middle there, and then if you look at all of the other countries, it gives you a rough sense of how many downloads you need to drive to in order to reach the top of the App Store in each of those countries. So let me talk about performance. So the performance objective here is you have scale, and you know your user acquisition costs and lifetime value. So now you really want to continue to scale and optimize the campaign. So what's important here, and it's a pretty, at the basic level, it's a very simple process, but obviously there's a lot of detail behind it. But you want to serve the ad, in this case, you want to track the conversion, you want to calculate your CPDs, and you want to identify constantly what are the best segments that are performing. And that may change over time. So this is kind of a iteration loop that has to be optimized and you think through. Finally, I'm going to talk about user quality. So in this case, once you have the user on board, how do you actually optimize the quality of this? So in this case, you want to monetize the user base more effectively. You want to maybe cross-sell or upsell. So the recommendation here is I'm going to go through a technology we have called Lifetime Value Platform to basically better understand your users and segment it. The other piece, of course, is around the targeting. So the more targeted you have your campaigns, the higher likelihood that you're going to attract the kind of users you want versus, say, kind of incentivized networks. So let me talk about the Lifetime Value Platform. So what it does is, at the most basic level, is it's an SDK you put into your app. It's free. But basically, it lets you track to different insights about your users. On a custom dashboard, you can actually come out with custom segmentations of your users. So let's say you have a segment of users you want to say that comes to the app frequently, defined by a certain frequency. Or you have a segment of users that are low paying, meaning that they don't really pay much in-app. And you have a segment of users that's high paying, that come very frequently and also pay a lot. So however it is you want to custom define your segments, you can do so of your users. And once you've done that, it really takes it to the next level where you can drive actions to those segments. So in this case, for example, if you want to push certain virtual goods sales for a certain set of segments, if you want to push ads, if you want to push rewards, if you want to cross-promote other games that you have, whatever is the key goal, you can work against that. So here's a very simple example. So and it's all customized, so you can actually have the look and feel look like whatever your game looks like. So in this case, let's say you have defined your segment as a high-paying user in developed economies that tend to purchase a lot during holidays. that's a very specific segment, but that's good because then that means you can really target what you're trying to go for. So in this case, you can literally define it that says, look, if the user purchase history is high, and the date is Halloween in the US, which is a major holiday in the US, then what you do is you can push out this, in this case, Captain Pumpkin virtual good, because it's Halloween, right? So it allows that kind of level of customization. This is another simple example, right? So if the engagement needs to be improved, you can maybe improve it through a basic kind of social taunt of some kind in this example. So finally, I'm going to talk about the monetization piece. So how do you actually make money? So there's basically 4 basic ways to make money in an app. So at the basic level, you can have paid downloads. So you just charge for the downloads. But I think as many people are finding, especially in certain emerging economies, you know, asking people to pay for the downloads is a tough proposition. And then you can do sponsorships. So some games companies may actually get sponsors for their apps. The other option is in-app purchases, which of course I'm sure a lot of you are doing already. And then the 4th option, and you can obviously do some combination of this, is advertising. So I'm going to talk obviously on the advertising front. I think most of you are familiar with the other models. But what's interesting with any app developer is we work with them not only as an advertiser, but also on the other side of the equation, which is as a publisher on the network. So in this case, you know, there's basically, from a publisher perspective, you think of your app and you are the publisher, and you want to serve ads onto your game. There's basically 3 kind of challenges or needs that you need to make sure that you're getting addressed. Number 1 is you want to ensure you keep your user experience. So it's really in your control as to when and where the ads show. So for example, rather than showing an ad right when someone's in the middle of playing something, which may be distracting and you don't want to do that, you can actually, in between levels, for example, have the ad come up. So once they finish level 1, you can have an ad when they're showing the score or something, and then it moves on to the next one. So it's really in your control as to where and when the ad shows and what kind of ad shows. The other one is around maintaining control around some key things like privacy, brand safety, and also competition. So you have to be sure that when you plug into an ad network that, you know, those kind of pieces are taken care of as well. And then finally, you obviously want to maximize your revenue. So in this case, you want to ensure you have the maximum number of fill rates. The fill rate is basically against how many impressions are being served. So every time someone sees an ad, basically, how many times is it being served, sees a page, how many times is it being served an ad. And then you want to think about the eCPMs. So how much money are you getting on the ad? So from the way this works is basically from an ad network perspective, you have your impressions, you have your fill rate that I just explained, and then you have your clicks, and then you have your CPC. And it ends up becoming a rev share. So that's basically how the model works. And here's just an example. So we work with, you know, one of many publishers is RAJU, which is, you know, one of the big word game games out there. So it's the #1 word game on iTunes in about 50 countries. It's the #1 casual game on Google Play in 30 countries. And you can see, you know, a huge number of users and lots of rounds of gameplay. So we worked with them in a couple of key markets because they wanted to scale beyond the big markets into a lot of the smaller markets, like, you know, in Europe, Italy, for example, or other markets. So what we worked with them is very close optimization and monetization of their platform. So we were able to, in this case example, increase their eCPMs by 20% relative to what they were receiving through any other source. I just want to finally share with you an example of an ad unit. So this is a rich media ad unit. So what happens, as I mentioned, you start off in a standard banner, you click and it goes full screen, and you can see it's far more engaging. It also helps yield higher eCPMs on for you guys as publishers as well. So this is just an example with Unilever. So it's interactive, so you have to shake the phone, the woman's hair gets all frizzy, you drag, drop, apply the Sunsilk, and it looks all nice. So this is the kind of interactions people can have, and then they can close the ad and they're back to your game. Great, so with that, I think I'm done.
I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose. That was a lot of information. A lot of information for just 25 minutes. I hope you guys were able to ingest all of that. Any questions after all that really informative stuff about mobile advertising? Yes.
Oh, hi. Did you saw earlier that there's a very hardcore game that CPI almost reached 30 USD per install. So that is a very high number. I just wondering how much is the LTV of that game that they can afford such high CPI?
Yeah, I mean, this obviously, this question, or the answer to this question varies very much game to game. So yes, there are games out there like MMORPGs, anything that has like high in-app purchases that will have, I've heard of games that have, well over 100, could be $100 USD per month sometimes for certain games. So I think 30 CPI is obviously on the high side, but ultimately any game you're doing, whether it's a casual game, MMORPG, or whatever it is, you need to really understand what is your lifetime value. So then ultimately you decide, what is it worth to you to drive to that install. So it really varies is the answer.
Got time for one more at least? I got one. When working with your clients, is it common that people will run a campaign at about lifetime value, counting on the fact that virality and word of mouth and things will sort of like make up for that break even? Or do you see people even spending a little bit more because of the potential for virality?
Yeah, no, definitely. Especially in the early stages of the game when they're trying to build that awareness phase, and then before they're kind of getting into scale, they definitely will, they may go above because they want to get that engine going. And usually a lot of game developers, once they reach a certain level of rank, let's say within the top 10 within the App Store, depending obviously on the game and the nature of it, it can be viral on its own, and perhaps you don't need to advertise anymore. But it's how do you get to that point is the big challenge.
All right, anybody else? Thank you very much, Phalgun.
Thanks so much.